our first item is the town tree removal. And I think we have National Grid with us and our tree warden, but I'll turn it over to you, Kevin, to introduce this item.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Good evening, everyone. One of the items that we've been talking about for some time has been the work by National Grid, the hazard mitigation work and their cycle trimming that they've been performing around the community. Mr. Bond's here with us tonight, as well as a representative for National Grid, to talk about the process and to provide an update. One thing that's worth noting is that the more comprehensive work, the hazard mitigation work, has been completed, is my understanding. So we'll just do an update on sort of what the process looked like, next steps going forward, and answer any questions that the board might have. But again, this is an opportunity just to provide a little bit more feedback and updates to the board regarding that particular work. Mr. Bond, thank you for being here. I'll let you speak if that's all right with you, Madam Chair or Vice Chair.
Hi, Dave. Nice to see you.
Nice to be seen. Thank you. Thank you. National Grid has a program. They're two separate programs. They normally cycle trim, which means they come through town every 5 years or so, and they trim certain circuits, which are like, that means trimming, like branches here and there, normally over the primary lines, so that we don't, in an effort to control outages. But the other program, which I think maybe the more germane topic, is they do another program every few years, which is called hazard mitigation. And that's more the assessment of trees that are really in decline that would potentially cause outages. And they'll come in, their arborists come in, they formulate a list. That list comes to me. And then I go tree by tree assessment, determining whether I agree or disagree with what they have put forward, and then they secure a contractor to take care of that work. So that work is, obviously more intense. Oftentimes, it requires removal of what appear to be mature trees to the layperson, which have serious signs of decay and decline, and no one other than the trained observer can see that. So that was this past, let's just say, year and a half. COVID slowed everything down. It slowed everything down permission-wise. It slowed things down removal-wise, what have you. But the bottom line is, and I think I had told Kevin this to keep him up to date all along while the various social media channels were having their field day with us. All I will say is that every single town tree that was removed, I also asked National Grid to seek permission from the direct abutter. So let's just say, Cam, you had a tree in front of your house that was on town property, and I said it was okay to remove it. I made them knock on your door and say, the town wishes to remove this tree. Are you okay with it? And over 90% of the cases, we got that permission. So I took that extra step this time because, the last time around we had a few more issues than we did this time. But the bottom line is, a lot of these trees really, really needed to remove. I took a lot of trees off the list. There were a couple of, beautiful, majestic oaks up on Hill Street that to the layperson look like they're perfectly healthy. They're not. But, it was one of those things where, okay, we'll just trim it and hope that it stays standing for a few more years, and maybe we'll talk about it then. But the bottom line is, in working with National Grid, the hazard program is different than the cycle trim program. Both Nash and Neil are on tonight. They're the people that I normally deal with cycle trim. The hazard program is a little bit different, but we finished up with the hazard program and it's done, and they're nearly complete with cycle trim on the the other primary wires on the major circuit in town. The numbers mean nothing to you, but it's the 26L1. But that's the major feeder through town that's mostly all primary. So there may be something that if the board has questions, there's two representatives from Grid here that could answer those questions if you have them. Otherwise, that's kind of where I'm coming from in a nutshell.
Thank you, Dave.
Any questions from the board for Dave about any particular trees or those programs?
So Dave, how often is that cycle, the cycle that we just finished, where you remove trees, not the hazard mitigation, not the trimming?
So hazards is about every 5 years, but it's normally offset from cycle trim, Cam. You know what I mean? It doesn't necessarily happen in the same year, but this time around, due to COVID and scheduling and things like that, the hazard program kind of lasted a bit longer than it normally would. Mm-hmm. So that without COVID, that would have been completed sooner. And then we would have gone into our normal cycle trim where they just trim, like I said, the smaller branches away from the 3-phase lines. And it's all an effort to keep the lights on. And, I think at least Boyd knows over the years, I'm at the front of the line trying to defend National Grid doing what they have to do here. We have a lot of outages, and the more outages we have, the worse it looks for them. So they need to do their job. But I'm here to do the job as the tree warden and help facilitate their work so that everything kind of works out within reason.
Dave, are 100% of the stumps left behind ground?
Not 100%, but Gary and I, and see, he's on too. Gary and I are working together to grind a lot of those stumps. It's not grid. That's the one thing that they won't do is grind stumps. They will on capital construction jobs, but Gary and I have been working together here at the end of the fiscal year to grind a lot of stumps, as many as we can. Gary, if I'm not mistaken, was that not work scheduled for today, Wednesday? You want to jump in? I thought he was here, but anyway, that work. Second.
Yes, yeah, they were in today for another full day.
Okay, great, thank you. So, for us, Cam, we're trying to grind the ones that are the closest to the road that might be a half Gary snowplows in the winter.
Yeah,
because you can't see them when they're covered with snow.
Yep, totally understood. I was asked the question, so I needed to answer.
Yeah, we're trying to grind as many as that the eye can see as you're driving down the road.
Thanks, got it.
I would just like to add that I'm basically in favor of working in coordination with National Grid and you, David, in terms of trying to determine what needs to come down and what doesn't need to come down. I think I heard a while back that you had like 50 trees on your list of that needed to come down, and then I think you just said that you've reduced that. Did you reduce that size of the list for political reasons or other reasons?
No, I think you might be confusing one with the other. So Kevin and I, the warrant article that we passed at town meeting for the $50,000 to remove trees, that's trees that I cannot otherwise convince National Grid to take down for nothing. So we have some of our own that we need to do. So. Okay. And that's where that warrant article came from. And we can, Kevin and I have been talking offline about, we're not going to spend the whole 50 right up front. I think we'll get I think the words I use are we'll get the worst of the worst. And there are a lot of them. But I think if we put a whole list together and we put it out to bid or RFP to the 3 main contractors that we use, we'll get a favorable price. And, but that's something I plan to do, this fall. And removals are a little bit cheaper over the winter. So, and especially when the leaves aren't on the trees, it's a little easier to clean up, that kind of thing. So that's kind of a separate issue, Boyd, from what, Boyd, they're easily 50. It could be 100, it could be 150, but I've definitely got 50 that are not anywhere near something that National Grid would take care of for us.
If you find, like you said on Hill Street, a couple of beautiful oak trees that appear to be perfectly healthy, and you know that there's issues with them, and you decide that you're going to take them down, and we move forward to that, are you prepared to fight that battle with the person that doesn't want that beautiful oak tree to come down? That's tough, because a lot of people are going to have a hassle with it.
I mean, no. You've known me for a while, Boyd. I never stray away from a good battle. But no, I mean,
I notice you're pretty thick-skinned.
Yeah. So there are a couple of big oaks up there on Hill Street. If they come down, and let's say we have, we don't want tropical storms and hurricanes, but if something in those trees were to fail, it's going to take down 5 poles, and the power will be out for a long time. And the residents out there at 281 Raleigh Bridge Road will be chirping. But I think I'm not ready to say, let's take this beautiful tree down yet. Let's trim it, and let's trim it again. And then when it gets to the point where we can't do anything else with it, we'll have to do something with it. But I totally get. We're a tree. At one time we were a Tree City, USA. Like most towns are. And
Yeah.
But when you're talking 150-year-old oak, it's a very hard decision for me to say yes or no. Because I'm supposed to be the steward for trees, right?
Well, and people need to know that you don't make those decisions lightly.
Yeah, right.
If it's a 150-year-old oak tree, nobody wants to make that decision.
Right. I don't take any decisions I make lightly. I felt like I've been tree warden 25 years. I feel like I've been, doing a fairly good job, and we had this great relationship with National Grid, and I think we'd like to maintain that going forward. And quite frankly, they saved the town a lot of money by removing, but it keeps their lights on, so it's a benefit to us and a benefit to them, and everything kind of works out.
Dave, the trees that are on your list, you said they didn't rise to the level of National Grid saying that they would take them down. But anything on your list you think is a danger to the wires? Is that why it's on your list?
No, not at all. These are ones that I can't Lynn, I can't say they're really a danger to the wires, or I'll have them look at them and they'll say, Dave, that one's not on us. It's not going to get us. But there are many places where there are trees where there are no wires. Sections of Raleigh Bridge Road, there's no, by the river, let's say. I've got 2 giant oaks down there that are in tough shape, but there's no wires. So you can't say, hey, National Grid, will you take down the trees? So these are truly the ones that are going to be on us as town-owned trees.
They're not near wires. What other reason would be for a tree to be on your list?
It's so bad they'll fall into the road. They're
just block the road.
Okay. Right. I'm only talking about the trees that are within the right of way, that are on town property, that are so badly decayed and rotted that if they were to fall on the road, you have that potential hazard. It's up to us to get rid of some of these. It really is. We've literally saved, over the years, we've saved hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars working with National Grid the way we do. And I think they appreciate it. I know they appreciate it, and we do too. So it's been a great relationship.
These old trees, I think, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm sure you will. You've done it for years. They decay from the inside, as I recall, the way I think. And the only way you know about that is to bore into them and find out what they look like.
Not necessarily. You can tell by looking at a tree and the leaf structure, whether it's in decay or decline. You can see voids in the crotches and things like that. Carpenter ants love oaks and they love pines. And eventually, when we take some of these trees down, you'd be surprised how hollow they are in the middle from insects, right? And then you're like, how was that tree standing? But and again, I think when Kevin and I get together and we decide, okay, this is the budget we might want to do this fiscal year. I don't think the intent is to spend it all in 1 year. And then we have some set asides for some of the other things that might come along any given year, any given time. That's all.
Great. Thank you, Dave. If there's nothing else, no other questions, we've got 7 other items on the agenda for tonight, so we can probably move along. But thank you, Dave, for all your work on this. Appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
And thank you also to National Grid for showing up tonight. Appreciate you being here. All right, the next item is the DPW department. There's a line painting contract that, Kevin, I don't know if you want to turn it right over to Superintendent Wilds.
So just one thing that we're prioritizing right now is investing in some of the painting that we've held off on the last few years. There are certain specific areas, particularly Route 97, have faded almost completely away in certain areas, and the vast majority of that 97 has significant fading. And so we're looking at investing in putting lines and investing in a longer term solution that Mr. Wilds will speak to. That'll give us a little bit more bang for our buck on the long term with relative to having those lines painted. So without further ado, Mr. Wilds, and I would say one last thing actually, and timing wise, we're looking, the reason the contract's in front of you today and not in a week and a half at the regular meeting is because we're trying to schedule the vendor in before the end of this month. And this contract will allow us to do so and have them begin some of that work prior to the end of the fiscal, which from a budgetary standpoint would be helpful.
Thank you. Hi, Gary.
Good evening, everyone. Just to reiterate what Kevin said, this is a basic one-year contract. I did try to get the vendor to no avail sign for a 1 year with the two additional extensions. With the volatility of the markets everywhere right now, no one is willing to do that and lock in the prices beyond a certain point. Understandably so at this point. Everything has gone up terribly. This is just a standard that we know we're going to paint more than 10,000. It's more than likely for this year going to be under the 50. So it's our best practice procurement. And in front of you is that contract. So part of that is so I can utilize some of my road, bridge, and sidewalk funding that I have currently on this fiscal budget to utilize some of that this year before the end of the fiscal year.
Gary, is that $5.15 per linear foot or a linear yard? What is that?
That is the low price. They go by linear foot and how they calculate that. So it breaks out. That's the totality of each section between paint and thermoplast. And in conjunction with that is our stop bars, if we have them, which are 12-inch, which are $3.50 a piece. So that low price is from Marking Zinc is the $5.15 in total, but they are the low bid on this proposal.
Have you used these guys before, Gary?
Yes, I inherited them from Dave. Actually, yeah, they've been a vendor in town for quite some time. Extremely reliable. Never had a complaint in all my years with Dave with them. They're a pleasure to work with.
Gary, you said you want to,
Thank you.
or Kevin maybe said you want to get this in by the end of the fiscal so we can use some funds. What kind of funds are we sitting on that are going to be applied to this 50K?
One of them is, and there's several listed, but it is mainly I'm thinking my road, bridge, and sidewalk money. This is my construction season right now. I pivoted quickly. I had another infrastructure project was lined up. We couldn't get it done in time, and I can't get that vendor back in. So I wanted to quickly move to this. It don't have enough for everything, so I'm trying to make it stretch as far as I can. And this is the next best alternative because I can't get the Ipswich Road. Sadly, Boyd, I had that teed up from Mansion to North Street, all those basins, but I could not get the vendor back in time after cancellation. So that will have to be on next fiscal budget.
Gary, is it more than Route 97 or are there other streets as well that get covered by this?
There are others. We're going to do 97, such a heavily traveled thoroughfare. And with our carbide edges that we have backing up our cutting edges in the winter, it takes a toll. The way a lot of the towns are doing it now, and I should say many cities that have the funding and or state, is they actually grind in what would be the line first to recess this paint that literally sticks up and it has glass in it for reflectivity. That is extremely expensive. It's something I'd love to try to do at some point and do a test case on a shorter street in town. But for right now, I need to get that road. It's been almost 7 years now since we did Route 97 with that money from the state, and it's time.
Is that how they make the sound when you drive over it?
Yes, it is. Right? So they'll grind it to, I think, about 1/8 of an inch. The thermoplast is it goes down at roughly, it's a quick drying. It goes down, superheated at about 300 degrees. As they put it down, crushed glass goes on top of it. So if you ever see this when it's fairly new, it gives you that really pop at night and is really a good safety factor. But with the grinding is what that does is lays it down in. So when we plow here in the Northeast, it's not continually getting beaten up by the blades. The problem is it's so cost prohibitive for small towns like us right now.
Yeah.
So is 97 the paint, Gary, or the thermo?
It is the thermo. So one of the things, if I paint that, which is now thermo, If I paint over that, I can never redo thermal. It will not take, and I would have to grind that off and start over again. So we try to stay true to what we do. This is a very good product. It is more expensive, but at the end of the day, part of this is public safety. And with that comes the glass, and that which does make a big difference when it's newer.
Okay. Could I get a motion, please?
Can I ask one more question, Madam Chair?
Yeah, you can certainly after the motion as well, Raphael.
Okay.
We open it for discussion.
You want a motion?
That'd be great, Cam.
Motion to approve a contract between the town of Topsfield and Markings, Inc. of Pembroke, Massachusetts for roadway line painting in the amount of $49,999 for a term ending on June 30, 2023.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? Raphael?
Yeah. So I just noticed on this contract, though, there's no estimates of linear footage. So we've got the per linear foot cost, but one of the other contracts has how many linear feet we're talking about.
They threw that in there. They had asked just for a ballpark. Some of them do that. I told them there was no guarantee of what we were going to do, but I needed their linear foot price.
Okay. Okay. And when you said it would be more than 10 but less than 50, that's the total cost.
Yes. Okay. And that means procurement standards at this level of best practice. If it rises to the level of anything over 50, then it would have to go to an invitation for bid.
Okay. And do we have an estimate of how many linear feet it's going to be?
We should be able, with this funding, I believe we should be able to get Route 97 done this year. And the rest of it, as we go forward, there are other streets in town that will need it. They're not in as dire shape as Route 97 is.
Okay.
All right.
Well, and part of that has to do with the amount of the traffic. I mean, Ipswich, there are pieces in Ipswich Road that are pretty bad too, but it doesn't get nearly the traffic that 97 does. Besides, Kevin drives 97 every day, so I mean, so he looks at it every day, and having those fog lines on the side of the pavement makes it pretty comfortable.
But I will tell you, in all honesty, like Ipswich Road, we're going to be at some point paving the outer part from the east side from Duncan out to the town line. That has thermoplasties as well. But in that regard, I would probably do the cheaper paint on that because we know we're going to be milling that up and paving that in the next, I think, 5 years, potentially.
Yeah.
And we may or may not have to do that out there. It would be lipstick on it right now, if you will, but it might have to do that, but I'm trying to hold off if at all possible.
Well, I that's good planning because if you know you're going to plane the road off, then you finish it off with paint for a time being, because as you said, if you paint over thermoplastic, you can't replace thermoplastic. So, you got to think about timing of when you plan to pave these roads and when you plan to plane them off.
And if there are no further questions, did you have a comment, Kevin?
Just one other road I'd mention is Washington. There are sections of Washington that are in tough shape. To Mr. Wild's point a second ago, with the $400,000 grant we received and the improvements we'll be making in a couple of intersections, Coleraine and at Boxford, with that paving and then the lines that are attached to that job, a significant part of Washington will be done through another bucket of money and through a different project. So anyone who's concerned that that road also might look shabby or not safe because the lines are starting to fade, we do intend in the next year to have those completed as well.
Thank you.
Just one more question, Gary. And I asked Kevin this today, and I understood part of what he said, but I didn't understand most of it. Couldn't this be considered to be Chapter 90 money as well?
It could be. Now, you're unaware of this, and we have the governor just signed into a bill not long ago, a month or so ago. By the time you have your next formal meeting, there'll be a contract in front of you from the state, which is called RAP money. It is Winter Roadway Recovery Act. And with that is $166,000 that we're going to be receiving. It's based off the same numbers that they do for Chapter 90. contract that we have in place that is basically, there's no end to that. But this will be separate, and some of that money can go there. But short of it is, yes, you can use Chapter 90, but we have to be very careful. We get very little money. And painting, yes, and public safety is one thing, but you have to weigh that with, you need to pave certain roads, and we've got roads that are failing.
Well,
You
yeah.
have to be careful where we spend that and how fast we do
So,
it.
so you use Chapter 90 money for more important stuff than painting, is what you're saying?
Typically,
Is this
yes.
new program in addition to Chapter 90?
It is a one-time from the governor, I believe, that he threw everybody a bone on the way out the door this year of this 166,000 for us, 423, I think it is, which will help us greatly because our Chapter 90 has been going down consistently the last 4 years on the numbers that they use, and typically it doesn't seem like much to many, but it's almost $5,000 a year less we're getting.
Yeah.
And this has been going on that I've noticed, and it makes it harder for us to stretch things when we have to do reclamation and or milling, paving, and then any sidewalks and all the rest of the stuff. So
Okay.
it's becoming difficult.
Okay.
If I could move to a roll call vote, let's start with Mr. Jackson,
Aye.
Mr. Brown.
Aye.
Michelle.
McDonald.
McDonald. German blanking, you know, I haven't had to call you. All right.
Aye. Aye.
Mr. McDonald.
Aye.
And Ms. Bermudez is aye. So it passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Gary.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Gary.
Okay, so the next item is the regional public health nurse. And we have a document up here, and I think Kevin is going to speak to the fact that there's been a change. Before we discussed having a consultant, a contracted consultant, and this is moving now to an employee. So Kevin, I'll turn it over to you, and welcome, Wendy. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Wendy, Barry, thanks for joining. I think I saw Sharon as well. So about a year ago, Wendy and the Board of Health were very proactive in a grant that was coming down the line from the state, allowing municipalities looking to regionalize health efforts and get regional support, a very proactive approach by the state to allow us the funding necessary to bring people on the support. Topsfield was one of the first communities to move forward with the process and successfully going through the grant process. And at the time, we had lengthy discussions around how this would be set up. Initially, we took the approach that a contractor supporting the effort would be the first and likely place we would go. And since we pursued that, but since then, we've had over 30 communities in Massachusetts also receive the grant. And all of those communities have gone in the direction of an employee versus contracted, so a contractor to support the efforts for a number of reasons: flexibility, what we're asking the position to do versus what a contract might look like. And so the Board of Health, Wendy and I have had numerous conversations recently about looking at changing the positions from the contractor to an employee. The employee or contractor is 100% covered, the cost 100% covered by the grant. And that includes, if it's an employee, any health benefits associated with that employee as well. So from a financial standpoint, there really is not a difference in either way from that perspective. Down the road, if we decide to go in a different direction, or if the grant money in 9 years from now doesn't continue and we need to go in a different direction, there is the possibility of unemployment as an employee. But the benefit of the period of time of having an employee and the flexibility has been shared with me, and I tend to agree, outweighs any of that potential down the road. And it has been brought to my attention that the state's been really pushing Topsfield to make things an employee versus rather than the contractor support. So got a whole team of people here tonight to kind of talk through it and share the perspective, and ultimately, we want to bring it to the board and ensure that they're comfortable with us making that modification. and answer questions or listen to any potential concerns that the board might have. That said, I'll hand this over to our health director, Wendy Hansberry, to maybe give a little bit more perspective of how the position's been going since its inception and a little bit about how the grant works.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you all for your time tonight. So basically, the short story is this has been really successful, wildly successful for us throughout the pandemic, and now as we're coming out of it and transitioning into another stage for this shared public health nurse. So we do share it with Boxford and Middleton very successfully. It was originally created to respond to COVID, the position. However, that is separate from the grant. So the grant pre-exists the pandemic. It was in response to the state's Blueprint for Public Health Excellence report, and that was to support local boards of health and strengthen our infrastructure, and employees are included as part of that structure. So the state has made this an objective of the grant, and the grant originally allowed us to make that choice. And I'm sure most of you remember this grant was an unusual, was presented to us in a unique way, and we were asked to apply for the grant without necessarily creating the positions first. So we did a lot of the work after using the money they gave us to be able to produce a lot of the documents, the intermunicipal agreements, which we've successfully done. And again, thank you all for your cooperation on that. So now that they're at another stage, they're really encouraging everybody to go to employees as an infrastructure support. So throughout the pandemic, the current shared services position has been huge support. Many of you have spoken to her. 8 schools, all of the nurses and the principals and superintendents, as well as the health agents, and anybody who needed information was able to get it. She was available. The position made somebody available for all of the parents who needed information about what to do, with a sick child or as a close contact. So that really showed how the towns could work together to provide a service that each community needs, as well as individually we've benefited. Topsfield was able to supply a nurse during the entire fair. We've put on up to 40 separate clinics for patients, as well as had strong support for our flu clinics. They've actually, the person who's in the position now is working on doing the COA elder abuse talk. So there's a lot of benefits that we're seeing, just in Topsfield, as well as there's a lot of other things that can be up and coming. Another big part that she has been able to sort of really help us drill down on it and handle is the cluster investigation, which is still going on. The state is still asking us to do that for COVID, but as well working with the camps on the immunization records. So there's a lot of different pieces that are moving that are being successfully addressed by this position. And we are looking to be able to provide more valuable local services and really grow this. But to do that, we need to have the flexibility versus a deliverables-based position. We want to be able to modify what we're asking the person to do as needed, as well as make sure that, while they're while they're working for us, they have hours and they can expand and pivot between working on a project to answering a question that, a resident gives us. So that's kind of just a ballpark of where we're looking to move this and why we're really interested in having it be an employee versus a contractor. And there's a lot of benefits to the town. I think we've seen a lot of them. I know we all saw her during the pandemic, but we're really seeing that position, sort of stepping into a role that I believe the community will find valuable in, hopefully, the next grant cycles to come. And I know Barry Keppard, which is the MAPC, he's the director of the Public Health Department for MAPC. I don't know if he wanted to just speak a bit about the grant. And
yeah, thanks, Wendy, too. And I'll pick up real quickly on what Kevin and you offered, and thank you to the board for the chance to be in front of you tonight, too. So to Wendy's point, when the special commission completed their work, and glad to make that report available to all if you haven't already seen it, they really noted a lack of capacity at the local level. You have people who are a health agent but have to take care of all the health functions that are required of a municipality or asked of a municipality, and that is an absolute stretch and something that can absolutely be affected if you get, I think, for example, I think you all are dealing with a large property right now in terms of inspections. And so it can really be something if you don't have the right kind of capacity. And a public health nurse position is very important as we think about infectious diseases, what's happening in terms of public health promotion, particularly as you think about younger and older members of your community. And what we've seen is a lot of municipalities have met this need through the shared service grant that's available from the state. And one of the wonderful parts about it, too, is that rather than saying as the state moves towards kind of making sure each city and town is really making sure and keeping up with their requirements at a statutory level, that there's a way to do that work in an efficient manner across multiple municipalities. So it's not every town needs a particular position, but we've seen more towns say, we need an additional health agent, we need an additional health inspector, we need a nurse, we need a clerk. And you've been able to do that more efficiently by hiring it across a set of 3 cities and towns, in some cases even 5 or 6 cities or towns. And so while this is a shift from a contractor to a full-time employee, again, it's an efficient move across 3 municipalities, as we've observed it from the coalitions that we've worked with, but really helps the city, the town in this case, meet your requirements along a number of different measures. So just as out there and say that, again, you gain a lot from the flexibility of having an employee. You can deploy a lot of ways to meet those requirements, to really kind of meet the community and where people are looking for kind of health improvement.
Thank you, Barry, and thank you, Wendy. I think up to this point, just to summarize, the board was very supportive of going with the grant and having this person and all the additional benefits that this person could bring. My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the rub now that we're running into is that there is a legal distinction, according to the IRS and the state, where if you're a contractor, you kind of, and just as you said, Wendy, you provide certain deliverables, but you are not overseen by the town. We're looking to give more direction, in which case it has to be an employee. So the kind of switching that you're talking about, moving one project to another, or how you want it accomplished, once you get into that realm, it has to be an employee, or the state would deem it to be an employee, and we would be in trouble if we were calling it a contractor when truly it is acting as an employee. Is that correct?
So it's slightly more complex than that, but that is, I believe, the crux as it has been explained to me. I know Barry is certainly more the person to sort of support that answer, and Kevin as well, HR. But my understanding is we are looking to be able to utilize that position with a lot more flexibility, a lot more direct supervision versus here's the contract with 3 deliverables and that's it.
Right. And that's probably the reason, Barry, that the state is pushing for people to take these people on as employees, because legally they're acting as such to get the maximum benefit.
I think that's part of it. I think there's also another part of it too, where as someone within an official capacity of the town comes with a little bit more like formality and recognition behind them and power in terms of doing that work. And so I think there's also something gained by being a kind of a part of the municipality as opposed to somebody who sits outside of it and is kind of seen as outside of it. And so I think they also understand what comes along in terms of what you can do in terms of being part of the community, but also in terms of the type of work you can do on behalf of the municipality. I think is in spirit also part of it.
Okay, a quick financial question. So benefits usually are about another third on top of the salary. So if we before could afford to have this person under the grant as a contractor, how are we fitting in that additional third to cover benefits with that same grant money?
So there is some flexibility financially within the grants, as well as we are looking at adjustments for the hours that were part of the contract versus the hours for the employee. There'll be a difference in the hourly rate as well as potentially the number of hours. We're looking to be, equitable across the 3 towns, as well as within the personnel structure is how. And Kevin, you certainly have more input on that particular piece, but that's my understanding of what we're really looking at overall.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess the bottom line is this will not, none of the costs of this person, the benefits or the salary, either contractor or an employee, will be borne by the town. 100% of it will be covered by this grant. And so that's sort of the bottom line. And then as within the grant, what we applied for is, as Sansbury said earlier, we had to apply for a number in a grant without having formed the job descriptions or the intermunicipal agreement. And so we went for the maximum amount, and we have a little bit of flexibility within that. Now, Sansbury also mentioned, we talked earlier today about now that we have 5 months or so under our belt, what the right number of hours looks like between the 3 communities. And she mentioned flexing that possibly down now that we have a little bit of experience, and that the rate, now that it's not a contractor and that it's an employee, would likely come down as well. So even if it didn't, we'd still have coverage, but we're still being, ultimately the tax dollar, whether it's through a state grant or locally, we want to be prudent with how we go about doing our business, make sure people are working and that they have plenty of things to do. And so we're making sure we get that right.
Kevin, is this a 1 year? I'm sorry, Lynn.
I was just going to ask one last question. Do they also get a pension?
If they're an employee, they would pay into the system, I believe. So that would be part of it, and I believe that would be covered as well. Let me double check, though. I don't want to speak out of turn on the pensions because I haven't had a chance to look deeply into that. Unless, Barry, you have some experience, or Wendy, I don't know if either of you looked into that one.
To my knowledge, I think like a lot of things within the pension, you need to work a certain number of years to be vested into the system, and so you would actually make payments in, but I don't know if you would actually be on the pension unless the job was to extend. I think it's 10 plus years, but I think that's the. Again, to your point, Kevin, I need to confirm that for sure, but I do believe that's the conditions under which.
Kevin, how many years does this grant cover for this position?
So the initial grant was for 3 years. We're now in year 2, I believe, of the grant, and we have subsequently 2 3-year additional grant cycles that are available to us. So ultimately, it will span a 9-year period of time.
No.
Great. Thanks.
No.
Kevin, tell us a little bit more about the decision to use it as a contractor rather than an employee.
Ultimately, it's the flexibility, the fact that the states asked in very definitive ways that the town considered having employees versus contracted. That doesn't necessarily require us to, but it's something we certainly want to pay attention to and understand and learn. And we want to make sure that I think that's really it in a nutshell. I would say that's really what we're trying to accomplish with considering the position go from the contractor to the employee.
Well, my concern is whether it's paid or not, whether it's a grant or not. There are going to be people that are concerned about the fact that if we take this person on as an employee, it's going to look like we're expanding our employee base and we're making our government bigger. And if we do a contractor, it looks like it might not. It looks like it might not appear that way. Am I off base there or what?
I know that when we went through our budget cycle, headcount, total employees was something we've spoken about. I know we've come up with really creative ways to maximize our staffing and how we deploy our resources. I'll go back to the reorganization of the DPW and the creation of the rec director position and saving about $16,000 a year in the process, all said, everything included. We did analysis right before I actually started to last budget season. Our total head count, we actually had one less person than when we started 2.5 years ago. That ebbs and flows. It depends on where we're at with different departments. But ultimately, optics aside for a second, operationally, if you just look at this grant opportunity and the fact that regardless if it's an employer or a contractor, the cost is 100% completely paid for, benefits as well. That and the fact that we can have additional resources for our team to be able to address things that might not be addressed otherwise, and provide the best public health we can out of the department by leveraging this grant is something to be proud of, and something I think whether it's an FTE or if it's a contractor, we should be very proud of the proactiveness of the department and the ability to have these people, to have the person in place.
I think the fact that you've got this 100% paid for somewhere between 3 and 9 years, but it's also a fractional head. It's not a full-time head that we are adding. We're splitting it with 2 other towns. Between those 2 things, I don't see the downside. I don't see the downside in the town's eye.
I appreciate you saying that, actually, because it is the employee's actual title has in it Tri-Town. The optics, I'm not sure how people would perceive it, but we are presenting it as a shared services position. So it, sort of strengthens that. Certainly Boxford and Topsfield have, lots in common, lots of, community services, and but the Tri-Town Middleton, and Middleton included. And hopefully people will see that it's, sort of our effort to be fiscally responsible, but also address a lot of health issues, public health issues that are coming up.
But Wendy, does this person go on the Topsfield payroll of the 3 towns?
We are the fiscal lead for this grant, so we are the ones taking in all of the bills for it. So yes, it would be our payroll. But there is a municipal agreement regarding having this grant. So
if for some reason, Wendy, at the end of 3 years, because life is so crazy now, we never know where anything's heading. And let's just say this program doesn't continue and it ends at the end of 3 years and we don't have funding for this. Is it set up such that that person understands that and that person is let go at that point?
Yes. If the grant goes, then the employee goes with the grant. And like you mentioned, it comes up, it gets reviewed, so it's not going to be forgotten. And the employee isn't going to sit in the role without somebody actively looking at the funding for the position.
But Kevin did mention unemployment.
That's correct. And my understanding is we would be obligated if we discontinued the program. The 3 communities decided to discontinue the program, or if the grant was not available to us, that's something that the town would be required to contribute towards in the event.
The town or the towns?
It would be the town. It would be the towns because we have an MOU that covers equal shares. But the where I got a good comfort level with what we're coming forward with tonight was, I might have said it earlier. If I'm repeating myself, I apologize. But whatever period of time that we have the person in place doing the good work that they're doing, if it's a year, if it's 3 years, if it's 9 years, if there is an obligation at some point by the town, it would be a fraction what the cost would be to pay that unemployment to what it would be to have that person staffed up and being paid out of the general.
Just to Boyd's point, Boyd, if I could just kind of reiterate what you said, just from the optics, just to be aware of, we've had the fire chief come to us and say that she could apply for a grant to have firefighters fully paid for some period of time. But after that, either we let them go or we have to have that discussion. And the town gets very used to having 2 additional firefighters or 4 additional firefighters. And then, you know, how do you say to people, now you're not having that level of service anymore, we're going to let them go? And that was just an issue that came forward with the chief. And it will come forward most likely with the health, the new health employee, because Wendy, to your point, they will be doing good things. They will be providing services that people are going to like. So at the end of that period of time, if it doesn't continue, it's not going to be easy. Anything in government that once it's installed, it's very hard to break away from. So there is going to be a difficult pullback to say you don't get all those services anymore, or we can't do those inspections anymore, or whatever it is, fill in the blank.
Well, you're absolutely right, Liz. Lynn, we gotta continue to look down the road ahead of us and say, well, these grants are all good and they're wonderful and they'll do good things for us. But what happens at the end of the grant? And are we going to make sure that we can pay for it at the end of the grant or walk away? That's always the question, in my opinion.
And in my opinion, too, it comes down to, is it worth turning down free money or not? I mean, if it's paid for, we'd be giving something up.
So one of the things that we could potentially consider as we are looking at the grant position and really filling out the job is, anticipating that grants. I mean, you're right in the sense you get to the end of 3 years or 9 years and you have to make those choices. Maybe it will be value enough, but we can certainly look at that and look at potential solutions for that.
And just perspective wise, we're looking at about 8 to 10 hours right now of direct support to Topsfield from this position, because it is the tri-town. And if we found ourselves in 10 years down the road, 9 years down the road, we might be able to modify that position down a little bit and maybe absorb some of those responsibilities. If it was a full FTE that tops, 40 hours a week for Topsfield, and they were doing 40 hours of work in building systems and providing support, certainly be tougher like a firefighter, right? That's where we've changed our business model with the firefighters. We've changed that to the primary, and some of those grants that the firefighters have, it's 100% in year one, then it's 75%, then it's 50%, then it's 25%. And then you own that firefighter, or you have that firefighter on staff for a certain amount before you can reduce any levels. This one's a little cleaner in that it's here's the funding, deploy it. Bring that support system in, and when it no longer is available, you can make a cleaner break in that sense.
Kevin, what do you need from us tonight, and what are the next steps? Let's say that if we agree conceptually, because it doesn't look like there's a set vote. If we agree conceptually, what is the next step? Where does it go? Have the other towns agreed to this as well?
Well, I was coming to the board first. I wanted to make sure, as the lead on the grant, I'd bring it back to the 2 town administrators and make sure they're comfortable with it. I think because we're the financial stewards of this grant, I think they'll probably defer to us in regards to it. If they have any issues or concerns that we haven't thought through, then we'd certainly pause and probably come back to the board at that point. But hoping for just a general support if we decide to go in that direction for the reasons articulated, that because we had so many lengthy conversations, that the board understands what we're looking at doing and supports that general concept of transitioning the position.
I have a question for you, Kevin, and then I have a comment. We're into 1 year of the first 3-year term, I think.
I think we're in year 2. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, but we're into the first 3-year term at least. Is that person working on a contract or is an employee?
We brought the person in the position currently in as a contractor.
Okay. Do you have any idea about the fact you'd like to change that to an employee status rather than a contractor?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, can you repeat the question?
Do you have any feelings about the fact that maybe that person should not be a contractor versus an employee?
I think there's more liability and limitations by keeping it the way it is currently. Now that we've observed for the last handful of months, gotten feedback from other communities, worked with Barry and his team at MEPC. I think there's enough support systems and examples out there and experience now that I think it's based on what the team's telling me, and you got to give the team the tools to be successful. If they're thinking this is the right thing to do, in all the other pieces, I'm in favor of making that transition.
How difficult a process is that at this point?
We would formally cancel the contract, and then we would post the position. And in the posting, we'd say it's a great position, subject to funding, which we did with the data analyst up at this Council on Aging. And then we would have it open for at least 2 weeks and do interviews, and then make an offer, hopefully, to somebody for the position.
Thank you. You answered my question. Now my comment. Regarding the problems that we would have 3 years down the road or 6 years down the road or 9 years down the road, when we no longer have these grants, it's just another decision that we got to make as to whether or not we want to keep that person on board as an employee. And then we'll have a lot more facts, and it'll be another discussion about a budget issue. So I don't see that any different than other stuff that we've done, even though we know that it's going to hit us in the face down the road. But then we've got some facts, and we can decide whether or not we want to go forward with it at that time.
And our learnings were free. I mean, I got to emphasize, we didn't have to budget for data. It's going to come at us free of charge.
Yep.
Big.
That's big.
And just one clarification, we did say though that the hourly rate would be adjusted. So in essence, whoever this person is understands maybe they'll get paid less per hour, but they're now getting benefits. So their total package would look the same. It's just less cash, more bennies.
Might not be a dollar for dollar, Mr. McDonald, but it would certainly be, that's the trade-off, is that now you're an employee on the pay grid,
Yeah.
Subject to the personnel bylaw, et cetera.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about the fact that we want this position. Wendy's telling us that she needs it. The Board of Health is telling us that she does additional stuff that Wendy doesn't have time to do. So I don't think it's a question of whether we need to do it or not. And we're doing it with free money for several years, so we ought to get on with it.
Yeah, the only question before us right now is whether or not we're comfortable with it moving to an employee. We all agree we need the position, and it's currently a contractor, but it was presented as a contractor before, and now it means benefits, potentially pension, headcount going up when we just came out of a budget discussion specifically about adding headcount. So they wanted to bring this before us to make sure that we all were comfortable before they went down this direction. So Wendy, it looks like it would be next budget cycle that would be addressing this already for fiscal 24. Is that right? If the grant is not renewed?
If I understand what you're asking, yes, we would be looking to get the employee in place as soon as possible. We'd be able to have, those discussions about budget at the next budget cycle. And the 3-year term is renewable for FY24, is my understanding.
Okay, so it's good through fiscal year 23. So we'll know whether or not we have to be addressing this for the next budget cycle. Either we
Yes.
have to find the money or we're going to get the grant.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have been told that having received the grant once, as long as the money is available, we will receive the grant again unless we say we do not want it.
Okay, can I get a general sense of the board then? I think, everyone's kind of put out their thoughts and questions, unless there's any other questions that people need answered. General sense, Boyd, you okay moving forward?
Kevin answered that question for me when he said he was very willing to make that transition at this point in time. So I'm okay with it.
And Cam, it sounds like you are as well.
Good interpretation. Yes.
That took a lot of insight on my part to know you were.
You're good.
Mr. McDonald.
Yeah, it's got my support as long as we make it abundantly clear that this position is tied to the grant.
Yeah, and I would ditto that. I'm not going to pass down free money, but make it very clear that if for some reason the grant doesn't come through again, this definitely has to be addressed in line with everything else that's going forward as a new initiative or a new headcount.
I think Wendy spoke to that. I mean, I think Wendy said we've made it infinitely clear that it is tied to the grant.
It is to that person. However,
To the current person. I see.
Yeah.
Well, no, we intend to. It's almost advertising as a new position. It is advertising as a new position. Regardless of who's there right now, we intend to make it very, very clear throughout the entire process to anybody who asks. It is tied to the grant. All the money and the supplies for the position are tied to the grant and supplied by that. And when the grant's done, so isn't the position.
Yeah,
Unless
the person, I think, is one thing in my mind. The other is everybody receiving the benefits of this position, because then it's very hard to pull back on that and say, we're not going to offer that anymore. That's always a very tough thing to do. So, okay. Is that everything you need from us tonight then?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Thank you, Barry, for coming in.
Thanks, guys. Mary, thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you for a chance to join you.
Thank you very much.
Bye, all. Have a good evening.
You too. Okay, the next item is the ARPA update, and we have Dave Larson with us tonight. Thank you for joining us, Dave. Kevin, do you want to give an intro to this?
Certainly, thank you. This is an update tonight in the work session to the select board on generally what progress we've been making regarding ARPA and the ARPA working group, and specifically a handful plus items that we've come to a consensus we'd like to discuss with the board and get a general sense of support in some of the projects we want to move forward. So Mr. Larson, as a member of the FinCom and our ARPA working group, has put together a slide deck, kind of going over again, reminding everyone about ARPA and then talking about some of the details. So plan will be to go through the deck and then answer any questions and discuss any of the items we have in front of you. So I'll stop talking and hand this over to Mr. Larson, and just make sure, do you have screen share ability?
I was just going to ask Debbie if she could give me screen sharing.
Mr. Larson, no less.
Yeah, I don't know where that came from. I don't. Let's see here. Share. Okay, now I got it. Hopefully everybody can see this.
Yep, we can.
Okay, there's a number of sections here. Just to go over the basics so everybody's grounded as to the ARPA criteria, just to bring everybody, Raphael, up to date.
Thank you.
The town received about $2 million of ARPA funds. We have 2 deadlines to use it. In 2.5 years, December 31st, 2024, the funds have to be committed. By the end of 2026, they have to be spent. In other words, if it's a big project going for a couple of years, that's why the gap. The category of eligible uses to support public health and economic response to COVID, provide premium pay for the workers performing essential work during the COVID, invest in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure, and 4, replace lost public revenue. And with the final rule in place, I believe it was January, it really changed what we were working the basis before. This lost public sector revenue became a very flexible, preferred way to utilize the ARPA funds. And the financial advisor we've talked to, the other towns, feel the same way. This is the avenue in general that's preferred. It's easy. Basically, we can use it for anything to provide government services. It's extremely flexible. So it made it a lot easier for the group to move on now to recommendations we'll come to in a moment as to where to start deploying some of these funds. Some general points. The funds are not required to be appropriated at town meeting, but it doesn't mean they can't be. In other words, we can use it to fund warrant articles via town meeting. My guess was the federal government wanted to make it extremely easy and fast to deploy where there was emergencies caused by COVID. That's the primary driver there. And last, funds cannot be used for stabilization funds. And I should add directly for stabilization funds, pension funds, debt service, borrowing costs, or a match for federal grants. Let's see. Excuse me.
Dave, can I ask you a quick question as you're between boards here?
Sure.
When you first presented this, or when we first talked about this about a year ago or so, there were a lot of questions. This looks, now you're talking differently. Now you're saying here,
absolutely, yeah.
The rules are a lot more solid. Is that right?
100%.
Okay.
Basically, we spent about 9 months going around in circles only to have the government completely change the rules.
But now there's no gray. Now we're not going to screw up, is what I'm saying.
Absolutely correct, and that really comes to the top one right here. These are the key criteria as a group we set up, so we had some guidance as to where we were going. That whatever we chose had to meet the eligibility requirements. This is a lot easier, Cam, than before. Before we were really trying to decide, did it fit in, did it not, and so forth, as you remember.
Yep.
And we had the potential clawbacks if it wasn't eligible. That's basically, I think I can say for myself at least, that's gone.
Right.
That risk is gone. So we can really focus now on the projects and the strategy of deploying the monies. And that's really where we're headed right here tonight. Larger projects are preferred, and this would be to minimize the reporting requirements. Capital projects that would normally be funded. If we would normally spend the money for this capital project, a new truck, this could also be funded by ARPA. And I'll come back, I think, to this point to clarify it a little more. In general, ARPA awards are used for one-time expenditures. To summarize it, the priority, not to the exclusion of anything else, but the priority is large capital projects that the town would normally fund. We would want to spend money on anyways. Effectively, what you'll see is we want to use ARPA funds to fund a lot of larger capital projects, freeing up free cash. And this is what a lot of towns are doing. So we're spending the ARPA funds, for example, instead of free cash for some items. The additional free cash then is available longer term. We can put it into the capital stabilization fund to fund some bigger projects down the road that I'll comment on. If anyone has any questions, jump in. I wanted to try to make this as concise and quick as I could. The project status by the ARPA group, update on eligible projects identified, the funds that have been spent or committed to date, and the primary issue here tonight is to recommend the next level of expenditures. And lastly, get some select board feedback. This list of potential projects. I'll just go through it very quickly, but it keeps changing. I'll put it that way. We take some items off, put them in the archive, put some new ones on. Premium pay, we went ahead, I'm sure you remember, in December. Public health COVID response and supplies, we put aside $100,000 reserve for response to COVID for health issues. Administration of the ARPA funds consultant, we're not sure if we'll put anything in this category at this point. Planner consultant, and I'm sure you remember, this is a 2-year, 18 to 24 month part-time position to support the master plan. And this came in front of the select board in the past. The FY23 budget offset, and this went to town meeting and was approved. You may recall it had 2 additional firefighters and a number of smaller items. The justification on this is this was being offset by increased ambulance revenue funds, if you remember. A new addition here we're going to ask for support on tonight is a master plan. The bid came in and we're looking for an additional $30,000 to go forward with the master plan contract. Nonprofits that have struggled due to higher demand for COVID, we really haven't, as a group, come up with any approach on this one, but we left it in as a possibility. Sorry for all the details. Police, fire generators, townwide culvert assessment, phase 2 municipal fiber loop within town, basically to close the loop for redundancy, and another fiber optic connect to Danvers data center. Proctor windows. This we had originally. This was the largest capital item in our 5-year capital plan. We had it in originally, then we took it out. And the reason we took it out was there was a timing challenge here. We talked about it a lot. It's probably about $900,000 net after MSBA money from the state. The challenge we couldn't get around was timing. You know, when will a tri-town be in a position to support Proctor school windows? When do they need to be done? And to coordinate it together with the MSBA funds, we found more than a challenge. Put it back here for another reason, though. If we generate significant additional free cash by funding capital items with ARPA money, this free cash would be available at our control in the future to fund large items like this without going out to borrowing that we normally would do. And I think this is one of the main strategies here, and I'll mention that later. 2 more items: water tower replacement partial contribution and fire truck pumper truck. Infrastructure and improvements. This is the last page. Design and build downtown pocket park. That's on the list of possibly going forward with. Parks and recreation. And I noticed in the recreation survey, you may have read it, there was quite an interest in not only maintaining but increasing some of the recreation facilities in town. I had somebody comment, maybe we should look at improving Hood's Ponds and things. So that's why this item is. There's nothing specific yet on it. COA is added this time. It wasn't on before. An outdoor patio at Town Hall is a possibility. The last 2 could have the most impact on town, but maybe are the toughest to implement. Try to leverage the funds to upgrade the downtown. For example, use matching grants or some other mechanism to encourage improvements in the private buildings, such as improving facades. You may remember this was in the original, even in the interim plans to improve facades to help draw more business. Possibility not so easy to implement. economic development. For example, some contribution as needed to help build out the old highway garage on School Avenue. I have no idea what this may entail, but we've got the resources, and we'll keep enough aside here to try to deal with some of these as we go forward. And here's really the heart of it. Where are we now, and what do we recommend now for further deployment of some of these funds? The total funds, just about $2 million. We've spent or committed almost 500,000 so far, and that was on the first page. So that leaves a balance of about $1.5 million. Our concern is we've got about 2.5 years roughly to deploy these funds, that we should begin to methodically, carefully start deploying some of them now. That was the thought process. But keeping some funds in ARPA gives us flexibility to respond quickly, as you know, too. The ARPA funds have that unique advantage. We don't have to go for appropriations and things like that. So I guess what we're trying to say is we're trying to strike a balance here, you'll see as we go forward. So here's some of the recommendations. Kevin came forward with some suggestions, some priorities to try to start moving the ARPA funds into action. Here's a group of 4 of them that we would look for comments and support on in terms of committing funds. In other words, go ahead, use the ARPA funds for these capital projects. Fire department and police generators have been discussed for as long as I can remember. As you'll see, they're both about 35 years old. The other side issue here is they're both inside. They vent the exhaust outside. So the intention on both of these is to put them outside. The highway department culvert survey and assessment. I read the proposal and the quote in detail to get a better understanding of it. And it's quite a thorough proposal. In addition to that, I understand that this is required in order to apply for some grants. So, and the last one is the master plan. As Kevin may have mentioned, you know, with the quote that the planning board and Kevin are comfortable with, we need another $30,000. So for these 4, my feeling is I'm very comfortable, and I think most people are, that these are something the town, the taxpayer would support and fund anyways, whether it was through free cash. So I'm very comfortable that this is something we would fund normally. So that's about 200,000. So that leaves us with 1.3 million. I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that, those 4, whether you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I'd like to say that I have complete confidence in you, Dave, and Kevin for selecting the top of the funnel, what we need to do fastest. But I think the most questions in my mind probably come up with a master plan additional funds. Not that I think it's a bad idea, but we've discussed this at town meeting, and we've discussed the need for a master plan at a certain number. So the delta overage right there, what's the answer? What's the answer on why it's coming in 30K more?
I think I better defer to Kevin on that. I think he's more.
Yeah.
So and I'll speak to this later in more detail when we get to the master plan specifically, but in the contract. But we had one respondent, reputable company, somebody who does a lot of mid-sized, smaller communities like Topsfield, and based on the RFP that we put out there and their breakout of the cost to perform the work over the 18-month period, which is a little bit longer, okay. Mr. Brett initially intended, we were looking for 12 months, so the length of it, I think, might play into it a little bit as well. But the monies we used, the $100,000 was the max on the grant that we can receive from Housing and Economic Development. The money we transferred for Coppermine Road improvements was maxed out of what was left after the road improvements. And so we went out knowing we had a fair amount and hopefully enough. But based on the response, it's short by about a little less than that 30,000, a hair less than that. And so we don't have multiple bids necessarily or respondents, so that's the number to make it happen. And it's not unusual. The initial feedback I did receive when we were talking with different potential respondents was, how much money do you have? And we said we had $100,000. I played the cards close to the chest. I didn't want to think, in multiple avenues. And I think that the reality is that like any other community right now looking to do one of these master plans, who might have a grant opportunity out there, they're cobbling different locations money to make it happen.
Okay, but I think the part of your answer that I was very clear with was it's going from 12 to 18 months. So there's going to be considerable more hours that have to be put into this than originally planned on. Is that fair to say?
That I would say that's a big component of it. It's all based on hourly rate for the consultant's work.
I think the planning board is very comfortable with this as well, the company, and so
good to know.
It doesn't sound like we have too many options with one bid return. So if we want to go ahead, let's go.
Yeah, we don't have any options, and I think with the way that rates have gone up across the board for everything, that this isn't that far off from what we thought it would be when we thought it was going to be 12 months.
Well, this is a priority for the town too, so it's not. You factor that in, I think it makes sense to go ahead. But to Cam's point, at least we know why. I think that's the important point. Yep.
I'm very comfortable with these, Dave. I mean, we have talked about a couple of those capital items earlier. The generators have been discussed,
ad nauseum.
Yes, to death. And the culverts, we know were necessary. We didn't have any funds for that. I agree with your list here.
Yep. It's a side point. See, I've got a bit of a dilemma. I view the ARPA money as the taxpayers' money, the town's money. And as much as possible, it should be lined up as with where they want to spend it. I feel comfortable in all four cases here that the town would approve these expenses using free cash, if we didn't have the ARPA funds. So that's my comfort level on here, and I think I think most people on the group share that.
Yep. I agree, Dave. Thank you.
Yeah, here's a second list of recommendations. And in this case, I think the group wanted to get more information on it, is very comfortable reserving these funds. But in terms of supporting a go-ahead and asking for support, I think what we're looking for is more detail in a plan here on these three. This is the fiber optic loop, the connection with fiber optic down to Danvers, and the pocket park downtown. What was very interesting and beneficial in this discussion, and we had quite a discussion on this, was the current fiber optics are in town. What came up is maybe we haven't fully utilized that yet. And I know Kevin had a discussion with the IT consultant to look at further utilizing for cost saving and efficiency the fiber optics we currently have. So that's a bit of a side issue, but it was a nice benefit that came out of some of those discussions, I think.
And what is a pocket park?
This is
Here we go.
Let me see if I can get this, Kevin.
All right, go for it.
It's a small public park. That's all I can come up with. I don't know where the term pocket comes from.
Typically, it's in kind of in between. It's an urban term for an urban park in like a downtown or a center. A lot of times, I don't know for certain, but I have always imagined that the pocket park terminology is because it's kind of little pocket. It's kind of not really overwhelming, grand central or anything like that. It's just kind of tucked away. But it provides a little bit of open space and gathering space. And if you want, I can maybe comment a little bit more on that particular item.
Yeah, I think that I'd appreciate that, Kevin. I was going to, so I think that could be a critical attribute for downtown.
So one of the things that we've talked about in our work at the ARPA group is transformative projects, and outside of the traditional, say, capital project or general operations, things that can make a real significant impact where, with all the needs of a community, having some outside source of funding could help us get there. And listening to the community the last 2.5 years, and I know everybody on this board and everyone on this call would probably say that they either themselves agree or they've observed that in the center of downtown, there's a property I think people would generally like to see beautified. And we've been working, maybe an understatement, we've been working pretty hard to build relationships and trust with the private owners and try to find ways to enhance the downtown in that particular area. And recently I've had a discussion with the owner about the idea or the concept of securing the area in front of the shopping center from the property line of the T-Hop to roughly where the shopping sign is now, back out to where the end of those parking islands are, and redoing those, beautifying those, and creating this public space with some term and legal rights to that property to create that open space for the community to gather, to grab a sandwich at T-Hop or a slice of pizza, to grab something at Zoomies, sit down and enjoy the open space and have somewhere downtown that's really beautified. The owners at a very high level and generally is interest in it. And as a next step, in considering that we need funding to do something like this, was to share this or provide an update with the board and get some feedback to see if it's something we should continue to pursue. With this particular one, because it would be a public-private partnership, there would need to be formal arrangements and guarantees contractually that the town would have rights to that certain area if we decide to improve it using these funds. But it certainly aligns with a lot of the feedback I've had over the last 2.5 years with regards to the aesthetics of that particular area of the downtown.
If I could add to that, Kevin, just so everyone understands the concept here, and it really isn't the concept stage, is you're going into the shopping center. You go in on the right next to People's Bank. That would turn into a two-way, in and out. So left from the island over to the Pizza House and all the way to the beginning of the main parking lot would be converted and upgraded, to a nice park with benches and things like that. So people could come from all directions. And if you think driving down Main Street, this would visually have a dramatic impact. And Kevin used the word transformative, which I think this could fall into that category. It's not easy, though. That's why we put the funds into, quote, a reserve category, with the note here that most likely all the reserve funds will not be spent for various reasons, okay? So just to give you an idea of some of the priorities that the group has come up with. One of the most things we can, I just summarize right, go back here, and I've got one more action item in a moment. Here's where we stand now. $2 million, it's a balance as we spending $500,000. We spent $200,000 for the generators and so forth. We're down to $1.3 million. Reserve for the 2 fiber optics in the Pocket Park, $500,000. We're down to $846. To try to get a handle on exactly what we'll have, and this is my estimate, we may have $200,000 that are not spent from various funds reserved. Just a ballpark number to get a handle on where we are. And you keep refining it as you go. But this is the estimated funds left to be deployed is about $1 million. We have 2.5 years now to move forward with this. So one more suggestion is on the next slide to utilize some of these funds right away. And we had quite a bit of discussion on this. Basically, to fund FY23, our recent town meeting approved warrants, use ARPA funds instead of free cash. And this is straightforward, easy to do. There were 12 articles that the town approved, funded with free cash. Discussed them with the accountant. Catherine thought these 5 would be the easiest and most straightforward because they were a single purchase. We talked earlier about trees, tree removal, tree planting, and so forth. Boy, that could run over a lot of years. You're not quite sure. So basically, this straightforward would be $336,000. We would simply fund it starting July 1 with ARPA funds instead of free cash. When the free cash is certified in December, it'll have $336,000 higher than it would if we use free cash. This would leave us with a balance of about $700,000. So I see a lot of advantages to this approach. One, it's been through the whole vetting process. The select board, the FinCom, all the voters approved it. So, there's high support for it. As Kevin pointed out, some of these items we may want to swap out with some of the other approved warrant article items for various reasons. Catherine might bring some things up. So what we're, at least from my perspective, what I'm looking for here is support for the concept of spending between 300, 400,000, whatever the group and Kevin comes up with is most appropriate to fund warrant articles that were already approved. Did I explain that clearly?
Yes.
I was trying to.
Yeah, I understand totally. Thank you, David.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, and it doesn't go away. We don't lose the free cash. We don't lose the ARPA funds. We're just paying with ARPA funds instead of free cash. But I had a discussion with Kevin too. It's almost $700,000 left here that will give us a lot of flexibility should we need the flexibility of ARPA funds going forward, over the next couple of years. So and nobody wanted to jump in and spend it all at once. But at the same time, I think there was a general agreement we should start to move forward and methodically deploy the funds. That's really so.
Well, plus the fact that if you save a bunch of money and winds up in free cash that we didn't spend, you've got a lot more flexibility about what you can do with that than you do with ARPA funds.
That's exactly right. We don't have any constraints on what we spend it for or time.
Yeah.
And I go back to those Proctor windows. If that's what we decide, we need monies for, normally we'd have to go out for borrowing on $1 million.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to have to. I think we can build up this capital stabilization fund. We'll have more than $1 million available we can use, which would really put the town in a pretty unique, flexible position. So
David,
I find it pretty interesting.
I think I overspoke someone. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Kim.
I think everything you're presenting is clear and makes sense and give us a flexibility that, I haven't heard talked about in a little over a year. So that to me is really exciting. The 700,000 is really exciting. But in one of your earlier boards, you don't have to go back to it, but in one of your earlier boards, you pointed out that there had been a consideration for the replacement water tank and then it got pulled. But we were told that, that's going to be a necessity. Whether it's windows or whether it's, a partial on a water tank, why was the water tank 86th from this thing?
It really wasn't. It's still on the list, but there was some concern that the water department represents 80% of the taxpayers. And, to use ARPA funds for something that benefits 80% of the taxpayers, there was some concern on that. Additionally, and I think Kevin can jump in, I believe Greg has enough funds in retained earnings that he's going to be able to fund this water tank out of retained earnings. I just talked to him about it. So we left it in there. We left it in there, Cam. And remember, this 336,000 is going to go into capital stabilization fund. So if we decide that's appropriate, we can pull it out whenever for that.
No, and just for the record, I'm a fan of the line items you have here. I think make good sense, and clearly they fall under ARPA guidelines. So I feel good about those.
Good. And just follow up one point of update. So we have submitted into the general bond bill for consideration $1 million to put towards the water tower. So another mechanism, and I'd also emphasize that there's some grants out there right now for example, the fiber. We have a regional IT effort, as everyone's aware, and with that, Topsfield and a few other communities that have been building up their municipal fiber, have applied jointly for a grant that will cover some, likely not all, of that $300,000. And so at some point, if we're successful with that grant, we'll probably couple together $150,000 from them and $150,000 from ARPA to make that project possible. Same thing with possibly with the water tower or fire ambulance or whatever it might be. We might use partial amounts of the funding here coupled together with other, like the ambulance fire stabilization fund that we created, and the revenues directly associated to be able to pay for that without taking out debt, as Mr. Larson had said earlier, which is a creative way to kind of spread it around and avoid that. So
that's a good point, Kevin. We have a bigger spreadsheet that has possible additional funding sources on there, so we don't forget on some of these line items. These right here, to my knowledge, wouldn't be eligible for additional outside funding, but that's a good question, Ken. We need to keep that, right on the top visible. If there's outside money, we certainly don't want to spend ARPA. The last slide really summarizes what I had in mind. Really looking for feedback and hopefully support from the select board on these two requests, to deploy some funds. The first one is the warrant articles using ARPA funds instead of free cash. This was already approved and, appropriated to spend it. And the second one was the new capital items, the two generators, culvert assessment, master plan. I don't know if there's any feedback on those, but anyone have a thought? The general feeling I got is people were comfortable with this.
I see no problem with it either. I think it's basically well thought out, and I think you're on a path of trying to use ARPA funds where we can and increase our reserve fund and in the capital reserve fund as well.
Yeah, my guess is, when this is all closed out, we can increase our capital stabilization fund by about $1 million plus.
Yeah.
That'll change a lot of things for the town, give everybody a lot more flexibility.
Yep.
Dave, what I like about this is, as you mentioned, it's had resident input because they already approved all those warrant articles. Exactly. So we're comfortable that they've had a voice in this, and that 336 will fall into free cash, and they'll have another voice next year as to how that free cash is going to be used again.
Exactly. That's why I think most of us are pretty comfortable. It took a while to get it evolved to this point.
Good.
Any other thoughts from the board about Dave's proposal here and the team?
Well, I'd just like to say that I sat in on an ARPA meeting a couple of months ago, and you've made some pretty major progress in the last couple of months.
Yeah, it helped. The final rule helped too. That interim final rule was circular. It was almost very challenging to say the least.
The clawback provision scared everybody.
Yep.
So everybody was totally conservative about what they were going to do, and if that's gone, then you've got much more potential flexibility.
And the problem was we focused so much resources on that eligibility issue.
Yeah.
Instead of thinking on the strategy. The last point I'd just like to bring up, and we don't need a discussion tonight, but Kevin brought up the pocket park as a transformative investment, public, private. We talked about the old highway garage. So maybe sometime in the future, the board could think about what direction you'd like to go. Are there some major transformative issues that would address your strategy on downtown revitalization, things like that? Just to give some feedback. We've talked about it a lot. We don't have a clear direction. We're supportive, but don't have a clear answer on this.
Well, I imagine we'll have a lot more feedback with the master plan.
That's a good point. That's an excellent point.
Yeah.
That's an excellent point.
One of the questions I would just ask the board, and thank you, if items 1 and 2 on the upper SB supported request, I got the sense that we'll continue to be able to move forward with those, so thank you.
I did just have one question, and feel free to tell me to talk to somebody else tomorrow or whatever, but where do I get more information on these 2 generators, their size, what fuel they're running on, expected, how often do we use them? It's too detailed for this call, so just maybe send me an email later and let me know, or we can chat.
I can send it. I've got it.
Okay.
And those quotes we've been talking about for a little while now. We would go back to the vendor and ensure that they're still adequate, pricing's accurate, et cetera. So just to the transformative item, because I've embarked in the conversation with the property owner recently, and the next step is for me to go back, it would be helpful with regards specifically, I know we talked about a number of transformative, but specifically the pocket park. Is the board comfortable in general terms? The deal, if we strike a deal, to be determined if we want to pursue it or not, but generally to continue the conversation with the property owner about securing that front part of that property and beautifying it using ARPA?
I'm definitely in favor of that. That's one of the items that residents have been talking about for the longest time. What can we do relative to the shopping center? And now that the board and Kevin over the last couple of years has built up a good relationship with the owner, and Kevin most recently has talked specifically about this idea, I think we're in a wonderful position to move forward and do something constructive that would benefit the owner and benefit everybody in town.
I absolutely second that, Lynn, 100%. And I would add that it's no easy feat to accomplish what Kevin has in working with this team, the owners. And Kevin, that's great tenacity on your part to get to where we are right now. Nice work, very nice work.
Well, it will be the first major change that's made in the shopping center to make it look like we're trying to do something.
Not just make it look like we're trying to do something, but actually do it.
Actually. And we've been criticized for the fact that nothing is happening there, and it's time to move on, in my opinion.
I think we've seen with Zoomies how excited people get about being outside, meeting outside, being able to eat and listen to entertainment, etc. This would, triple, quadruple the space available to do just that in that pocket park.
Yeah,
100%.
And just a related point, this may take a little bit of time, but the methodology we're using here of spending ARPA instead of free cash and putting the free cash into the capital stabilization fund would still have the resources to do what the town wants to do.
Yeah.
Should it stretch out?
If you're working on a project that you have that has been assigned ARPA money, and it's 2026, and we're up against the deadline, and we've broken ground, and whatever that project is, that's enough to say the project's in the works. Is it enough to show a plan and a team who's going to execute on it? Are we clear on all that?
I'm not clear, Kevin.
Yeah.
I thought it had to be done by the end of
completed.
Yeah,
okay.
That was my thought.
Invoice paid.
So one of the things that I think as we get further along in the process, like Mr. Lewis said, we're being very strategic and taking step by step and not rushing ahead, but thinking about at that point, my hope is that we don't have ourselves in that position, and that the funding for either immediate capital projects can be dispensed without a long lead time, or secondarily, we potentially, like we did this year, and a number of communities have done it, and our auditors have said it's acceptable, is to apply in, say, the next budget or two, apply some of this towards the general operating on a one-time basis, which ultimately means it could fall back to free cash at the end of the year, which it should and would, as an alternative way of being able to use those funds eventually into a stabilization fund. But I think the priority right now is to sort of table that and focus on the projects and the capital items that we talked about.
Good.
But again, I go back to the initial point. The goal is not to get to that point where we're sort of rushing at the 11th hour to try to throw money at something. We'll do our best to avoid that.
Okay, do you have everything you need from us, Dave and Kevin?
Yeah, I do.
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. This is great
Thank-
work, and
thank
it's
you,
very
David.
exciting.
Yeah, I agree. Terrific.
Any ideas on additional projects, particularly that would be to transformative? I think the next time we get together for another update would be, we could spend a little more time on that.
And we'll have more information back on those other items that you mentioned, the pocket park, obviously, with Kevin moving forward with that, and the other two items that need to be fleshed out a little bit more.
Yep.
Great. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, just keeping us moving since it's almost 10 of 8. Next is the master plan, the draft charter. That it doesn't look like we have any document, Kevin. It looks like we have a draft contract.
Yes. So the charter will be distributed. You were getting feedback.
My fault.
That's better. Okay. So the plan would be, I've been working on multiple communities charters for this. I just found another one that I actually really like. So before I put something out, I wanted to make sure I had a little bit more time to put the document together. The plan will be is I'll distribute it. We'll post it on board docs, but also email it to the board for their review. That's not as time sensitive as the next item, which I do have a draft to review. But to go back to the charter, this is a master plan steering committee, which will help for the 18 months, basically ensure that we're promoting activities, for gathering data. It's really the engine that helps us pull all together, and it gives a broad perspective from different people in the community, from different disciplines, and from businesses and residents, people with historical backgrounds or agricultural backgrounds, provides them a seat at the table to make sure that different viewpoints are expressed and considered. So charter will have to get created, that people need to be appointed, but we have a little bit of time on that, and I want to make sure I got everyone a good document before we put it up there. So should have it shortly to everybody.
Great. And the contract, I know we just got it literally a couple of hours ago, so I'm sure you're just going to give us an overview and not look for input tonight.
Nope, yeah. So basically, just so everyone's aware, I talked a little bit about it a minute ago, but we went through the process. We had a selection committee made up myself, the chair of the planning board, Martha Morrison, and member Steve Hall. We interviewed the applicant. We reviewed the application. We graded the applicant. We came to a consensus in all the different pieces of the grading criteria that were created based on the RFP, and then unanimously voted 3-0 to award the contract to J.M. Goldson. As I mentioned earlier, they just finished Ipswich's community development plan, which is in essence a master plan, but a little bit slightly modified. They've done a number of other communities in the region over the last handful of years, and they've got a really good support system to provide the necessary consulting for this project. The sort of time sensitivity is that the state asked for us to provide a signed contract for them to release the $100,000. Initially, they said by the end of this month. More recently, they've indicated they wanted by mid-month, so roughly now. But I've pushed back, and another community pushed back as well and said, hey, you told us the end of the month. So we have about a week or two to get the contract in order. Contract's pretty standard. It's been updated to consider the exact project. In addition to that, includes the application or the response from the applicant in its entirety for review as attachment A. Hope is the board has any feedback, if you could provide it to me by Tuesday of next week, that would be really great. Any edits or comments or concerns or questions, and then we'll send that over to KP as well as to Jan Goldson for their consideration as well.
Kevin, I'm sorry to interrupt, but has KP seen it at least once at this point, or are they just seeing it for the first? So we'll be providing comments for you before KP's comments?
It's a little atypical only because because then I can bring back to KP the document that's been reviewed by the board and we're comfortable, and then they can make comments off of that. With regards to the timelines, some of the items we would typically are overlapping a little bit just to keep the timelines tight so we can move it. But KP, before we go to contract, KP will have reviewed and sign off, and the board will have the opportunity to review and ask any questions or make edits accordingly.
When do you expect to hear back from KP? If we need this out by what, a week, you said, a week and a half, a week, something like that?
We need to vote on it on the 27th.
Oh, okay.
Or the 21st. We talked about having another meeting. Actually, we're going to raise that at the end of this one to take a look at it. So was the 21st when you were hoping for us to review it with KP's edits? 7?
If comments could be back, and if we wanted to have a meeting to discuss any comments that the board might have on the 21st, that's welcomed. If you want to provide without a meeting comments back to me by the 21st, that's Tuesday, I'll incorporate those and send it to KP to keep it moving, and then have it back by the 27th for the vote, and then we'll sign it on the 28th and get it to the state that same day. The document is the standard contract form, in essence, with just the inserted specifics to this contract. So it hopefully shouldn't be an extensive review from KP from a time standpoint, but we'll certainly make sure on a big contract like this that they reviewed it and signed off.
So in the past, Kevin, we've had KP look at it before we get it.
Right.
Usually it comes to us once KP has looked at it. Can we have them look at it at the same time we're doing content? We're not going to give legalese feedback.
Yep.
We're going to provide more content-based. Could they be concurrent?
I mean, I could send it to them tonight and have them and ask them to start reviewing this while it's being reviewed. And then if there's comments from you folks that might be content-based, I go back to them after the fact. It might speed the timelines up. Certainly could do that. My concern was kind of crossing with the version control items of the contract, but that's okay. We can make it work. From a time standpoint, I could expedite it by getting it to them soon and get them to them tonight.
It's pretty tight as it is, so probably the sooner the better, since we've got a little over a week to get both their input and ours incorporated. Did you want to meet on the 21st then? You had mentioned a possibility of getting together earlier. Do you still need that?
I think if I'm going to send this to KP simultaneously, let me send it to KP tonight, and then if
why don't you just schedule the meeting for the 21st, and then we have it posted, and we can hold a meeting if we want to, or we can cancel it.
If we do that, which is a good idea, I mean, we can always cancel, but does that work, Cam and Raphael and Boyd?
Could we do it earlier?
Yeah, we were thinking somewhere between 3 and stopping at 6:30, more on the earlier side. I don't know if that works.
Yeah,
Just so you're aware, Kevin has a 6 o'clock Zoom already scheduled for that day.
A 6 o'clock. Okay, so we're doing 3 to 6.
I could do 4 or 4. I could do 4 or 4:30.
Raphael and Boyd?
4.
I just gotta check.
Whoops. See, my old retired mind lets me schedule these things whenever you guys want, and I forget about the fact that we have some working stiffs here.
Don't forget.
No, the afternoon works okay for me.
Okay, so,
But you don't mean 3 to 6:30. This isn't going to be a 3.5 hour.
no, it's gonna start
Okay.
at 4. That was what was proposed. Does that work, Raphael? 4
Yeah.
o'clock start? Okay, and probably it's 45 minutes, Kevin?
If that,
Yeah.
I think. What I'm hoping is we'll get the feedback from KP because it's not a heavy contract for them to review. Feedback from the board, if we could by Monday, and then I could pull it all together for our meeting. If it's 100% and we're good with it, we can vote it, and I can get it over to the state. If it's not, we'll just have to make final edits and go on the 27th with the vote.
Okay, I will motion to add a meeting for June 21st at 4 p.m.
Second.
Ending at 5:30.
Yeah, we won't go any later than that because Kevin definitely has a hard stop at 6, but I don't think we'll need that much time. But is there a second?
Yes, I'll second.
Okay, and we'll do a roll call. Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Brown?
Aye.
Mr. McDonald?
Aye.
And Ms. Bermudez is aye. All right, that's good. That way, if there's any last minute discussion,
Yeah,
questions,
sure.
or whatever, it's nice and clean for the 27th.
Yep.
Kevin, can I ask just one question? The documents up on board docs, there's a PDF and a document. Those are the same, right? Just different file formats?
So what I did is I scanned in what the attachment A would look like to the applicant's response with the draft so that you could see the entirety of what the contract would look like. But for an editing purposes, work off of the Word doc.
Perfect. Exactly. Thank you.
Okay, anything else on that? So we're getting input to you by Monday? Is that what
That would be great.
That's doable with everybody? Monday comments? Okay. All right, anything more on this, Kevin, or moving on to HR?
We're considering a great spot. Looking forward to keeping it moving. Thank you.
Okay, super. All right, so now we're moving on to the HR study and the salary survey and getting an update from Kevin.
So just wanted to give everybody a quick update where we're at. I know I've been giving them in the TA updates, but in a work session, we wanted to provide the opportunity to ask any further questions. But so there's multiple components to what we've been doing. We've been for multiple years now having outside consultant look at our personnel bylaw policies. They provided feedback in the beginning of the year. We put together a working group made up of outside and internal staff and HR experts to review the work that was done and review the policies as in its entirety and eventually provide recommendations, things they want us to consider accepting or not. Simultaneously, we are now moving forward with our salary survey, which we've talked about for some time. We're going with HR Gov USA, who just completed Boxford's salary survey. And recommendations that come highly recommended from a number of other communities that have used them. So we'll be working with them over the next month or two regarding that. And then the hope is by the end of the summer, early fall, to have compilation of all of the information and recommendations to provide back to the board. At a certain point, though, prior to that, we might go into an executive session just to talk about some of the strategy related to some of the data that we'll receive, as many of the next steps we'll take will be data-driven based on the analysis that are performed and the feedback we receive.
Okay, any questions for Kevin on the HR items?
Yeah, what's the scope of the salary survey? Apologies, I'm sure you've discussed it with the board before, but is it all town employees? Does it include schools? Is it specific to one department?
That's a great question. It's employees relevant to the personnel bylaw. So it won't include anyone on a professional contract with myself, the fire police chief, and it will not include unionized employees. So the police, fire, and DPW will not be included in this as well.
Thank you.
Welcome.
All right. That looks like everything on our list. Is there anything left, Kevin, for us to add? Sure.
One more, it's the homegrown market. Just wanted to remind everybody.
Oh, I'm sorry. I missed that. We went
No,
right
no.
by that.
This is a fun and easy one, so it's a good one. That tomorrow is going to be that our first homegrown market, 4 to 6:30. One item I spoke about last meeting was introducing the potential of some wine tasting, or possibly Ipswich Ale reached out to us about doing a beer truck. What we're going to do for tomorrow is just do samples on the beer specifically, kind of get our feet wet, see how it goes, learn, see if it's something people respond positively to, and then move forward if accordingly if we want to do anything different in the future. But we want to make sure we do it right from a safety standpoint and both from a fairness standpoint of how we operate and what we do on the town side to what we also ask outside vendors or residents to as well. So that's from that specific perspective. So no approvals needed for liquor licenses or anything like that. At least this month. And then also just want to let everybody know that we'll have, I think, 10 vendor tables, some games. We'll have music. It's an a cappella group that will be playing or singing. Singing at the event. And we're just really excited to be able to kick it off and offer another opportunity to create some placemaking and activate the space. And I just want to a big shout out to our rec director, Stephanie Sweeney, who once again, when thrown a challenge, is grabbed the bull by the horns and is pulling it all together in really professional and great form. So good work by her and many others behind the scenes to help make this happen.
And evidently ordered fantastic weather.
Yeah. Floyd, did you say?
And this is from 4 to 6:30?
Yes, it is.
And Kevin, there's no street closures for this, but I'm sure we have safety personnel present.
Yes, we'll be fully staffed. Police chief, captain, fire chief, and staff. We'll also, Superintendent Wiles will be bringing down barriers in the event that it does become hectic and we need to put some sort of barriers out for any type of traffic control. We will do so, but because it's confined to the common, we feel strongly that shouldn't become an issue from a circulation standpoint. But we will be prepared in the event from a safety standpoint. If it gets to that point, we will deploy it if needed.
Thank you. Any other questions before we take our final motion?
Just one clarification. So are they selling or giving out samples, and I guess that's under different laws, and then are they able to sell their product then or not?
Yep.
Like so closed bottles.
Exactly. So there's Alfalfa Farm, who won't be here for this month, but it's going to come in a future one to do wine tasting. They have a specific winery agricultural license that allows them to sell their bottled corked wine and provide samples of the wine if they're choosing to do so. Not every vendor has this, but the specific vendor who will be there tomorrow, Ipswich Ale, has a license as well, which is, I'm pulling it up on my phone so I can give you exactly what that is. It's a farmer's brewery license, which gives them the same opportunity under that licensure with the state to be able to sell their cans, closed cans, and provide samples the same way Alfalfa Farm would. So it'll just be small little cups, and just so people can purchase a 6-pack of beer or whatever it might be they choose to do so.
And they'll be carding people, Kevin, to ensure that only people of correct age are receiving these samples.
Yep, absolutely. So you go up, you'll have to prove you'll have to provide your license or a proper form of ID showing that you're of age.
And since they're little tiny cups, there'll be one swig or two, and so they're not wandering around the common with beer.
Yep, exactly. And that's very intentional. And we talked at length over the last week and a half from the different options of what we could do with having sort of the beer garden concept to just the samples, and being the first time we're doing this and understanding that we want to make sure we're doing right and learn from how we do it. We're going to start with a sample, see what the feedback is, see how many people come to the event, and then if we decide that we want to take the next step, we'll have some data and some experience to go off of. So it'll be the small ones, and there won't be any lingering drinking or anything like that. So.
All right, very good. If there are no further questions, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Yeah, good. Second.
Okay, thank you. Roll call, Mr. Jackson,
I vote aye.
Mr. Brown,
Aye.
Mr. McDonald,
Aye.
and Ms. Bermudez is aye, so it passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Thank you for